Just one moment. All right. Hello, and welcome to Proven Solutions, community investments that transform youth justice. This is the first in a series of live events presented by the National Center for Youth Law, which is proud to celebrate 50 years of impact in 2021. It is our honor and privilege to have today's discussion moderated by James Bell, the founding president of the W. Hayward Burns Institute. Mr. Bell is a recognized national and international expert on the intersections of justice and education, health, and family disruption. He has trained thousands of human services professionals and community members on race, ancestry, and inclusion as necessary to the delivery of safety for all communities. His work also includes advising and helping municipalities and governments reimagine services for families and communities impacted by the justice sector. Mr. Bell, welcome, and thank you for moderating today's conversation.
Well, thank you, Patty, and good afternoon, everyone. I am James Bell, as Patty just said, and I am thrilled to be and humbled to be asked by my good friend Frankie to moderate this conversation that is going to be interesting and enlightening. So let me just say that I am not in the Bay Area this afternoon. It is one of the first trips I've taken since COVID. So I am currently in Minnesota, and I am in the land of the Dakota and Ojibwe people, and want to acknowledge that in the place that I am, and want to now introduce the panelists that we're going to be hearing from today. So first, we're going to start with Jocelyn Aguilar. Jocelyn is a youth advocate and community organizer at the Young Women's Freedom Center, an amazing organization doing work around the state. She was recently a part of the movement to remove SROs from campuses in San Jose. And that, for people that don't know, in the public, those school resource officers or police officers on campus. And she's currently working to engage Black and Brown youth and undocumented families in advocacy to end the incarceration of young people. She is also a student and a new mother to Joshua, who is interested in continuing her professional and personal passion for reforming the youth justice system. Next, we're going to have a panelist that needs no introduction, and that is Elizabeth Calvin, who is the senior advocate in the Children's Rights Division and an attorney with experience in youth justice, foster care, and education rights. Since 2012, her leadership of coalition-based efforts in California has resulted in 11 significant laws being passed, many with first-in-the-nation strategies to reduce incarceration to promote the potential of young people. And we're going to be talking about some of those laws and some of those first-in-the-nation things as a part of our main message today. These laws have changed the lives of thousands of young people, families, and communities in California and beyond. And next, I'd like to introduce Frankie Guzman, a very good friend and colleague, and the attorney and the director of the Youth Justice Initiative at the National Center for Youth Law. Frankie was formerly incarcerated as a young person, and he has used those experiences to lead statewide efforts to eliminate California's practice of prosecuting 14 and 15-year-olds as adults, to prohibit the incarceration of children under the age of 12, in the youth justice system and secure approximately $60 million to expand pre-arrest diversion programs and developmentally appropriate, culturally relevant, community-based services for youth in California. So as you can see, we have a mighty panel, and we have a tight timetable, and so we're going to get right to it. Many of us have a lot of Zoom experience, and what we like is a lot of information in a short period of time delivered by interesting people, and that's what we're going to get today. And so I have been involved in youth justice in California since 1981. And at that time, there were about 10,000 people in what was then called the California Youth Authority. And brutality, kids in detention centers in 56 counties, and just full to the brim of people behind bars. And putting kids into adult court, all of that, an attack really on our communities, especially communities of color. We have come a long way as we've come through 2021. And so I'd like to ask Elizabeth, how has California been a beacon, been a place that came from where we've come from, Elizabeth, back in those dark days, to a place that other states are looking to and emulating what we do? So give us some of that name and flavor on how that's happened.
Sure. I mean, in thinking about preparing for today, I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind is how much of a team, community, broad effort, all of the changes that have happened in the last 15 or so years, how much that has been, really the key to it. But I'm going to talk about 5 things that I think have contributed to our success here and to some of the changes that have happened, and really contributed and laid the groundwork for some of the biggest changes that we've been able to achieve so far. The first thing that I want to say, and I want to say, of course, people use these ideas and rely on these concepts, across the country. These are just 5 concepts that I see us really relying on here in California. And the first is really looking to what a North Star goal is. So one of the things that is apparent as I've done work on advocacy is that there are lots and lots of good ideas about how laws should be changed, what things should be improved, big ideas, small ideas. But if you're not acting from a place of where do we want to get to, then what happens is you can end up expending tremendous amounts of resources and time to pass a law or change a policy that isn't really moving you towards the North Star goal. And I'll give you the example of, when Frankie and I and others started first working on some of these issues in long after you had been working on them, James, in 2006. I'd say our goal, Human Rights Watch's goal, was to work towards ending transfer. But in 2006, that was something that people wouldn't even say out loud because it was so ridiculous to think that that would be an end goal. So obviously, you need to kind of think about what are the steps towards that goal. There's a lot of other things that we could have focused on, but we ended up deciding to work on the issue of life without parole for children. Now that's an issue that has validity and is important and is it's horrific that this country would sentence children to die in prison. But we also felt that it was going to help pry open the door to eventually ending the use of transfer or prosecution of children into the adult system. Another example that I'll give is that Frankie and I helped lead a small group of advocates who spent a couple of years working on a document that identified key goals for a 10-year period in California. So the document ended up being called the 10 by 10 because it was 10 bold but actionable ideas for reform over a 10-year period. And that document became very important for many advocates to rely on, because one of the things we tried to do was recognize when there needed to be a certain sequence of different policies changing in order to not create bad effects. So for example, closing juvenile prisons without first figuring out how to not have that create a situation where judges were going to be more likely to send children to the adult system because there wasn't a viable alternative at the juvenile level. That's the kind of sequencing that is ultimately going to make us more successful for these kind of longer term goals. The second point that I would bring up is to recognize that this work is so much a marathon and not a sprint. And what that means, I think, is that we have to go into it expecting failure. I mentioned the work on the life without parole, and you might have had the impression that we decided to get rid of life without parole and passed a bill and then moved on to the next thing. But in fact, it took almost six years to pass a bill in California that would give a second chance to children who got the sentence of life without parole. And so we failed over and over and over again. And in that process, we learned a lot. I think people learn more from failure than success. And we learned a lot and really laid the groundwork for pretty significant other changes leading up to dramatic reduction in the prosecution of children as adults. The other thing I think that the marathon example is to focus on incremental steps and to not be afraid of incremental steps. The last few things that I'll just mention are, one is to diversify allies. And by that, I mean work with people who you don't necessarily agree with on everything. And an example I'll give you is the Catholic Conference of Bishops. I can tell you that they do not agree with a number of things that, for example, Human Rights Watch works for, abortion rights, the rights of LGBT folks. And yet they agreed to work with us on ending life without parole. They agreed to work with us on creating second chances for other people with lengthy sentences in adult prisons. And we could create a relationship of working together, even though we hated each other's perspectives on other things. Sometimes I've heard fellow advocates say, oh, but we can't work with X because we can't trust them. And I guess part of my message is, this isn't about trust. Trust is not the basis of moving forward on these issues. It's clear communication, accountability, clear goals. The last two things that I'll mention, one is the importance of creating unity among fellow advocates, a recognition that many people who are in this space have been screwed over and over and over again by the system, by white people, by people who say they're acting on their behalf and aren't. And to recognize that building unity and a common vision has to take into account those perspectives and those experiences. And then finally, and I would say this is the most important thing that has made California successful, and that is the leadership of people who have direct experience in these realms. And so not just the testimony, not just the stories, but the real leadership at the table, in the rooms where decisions are being made. I mentioned the youth offender parole law, and James, that law ultimately affected some 40,000 people in prison. And the idea for that law started with someone who had spent time in prison. So when I say like the leadership and involvement, it has to be at a very concrete level. So those are the 5 things that I see as crucial to California's work and to our success. Frankie, I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to add, or if I hand it back to James.
So thank you, Elizabeth, for distilling what are some important common themes. I love the idea of the North Star as the way to light your subsequent themes that you use and strategies. And Frankie, having lived through this and working tirelessly around it, give us your sense coming in from what you've seen as to what are the possibilities and what has been done in California that the rest of the country is taking a look at.
Sure. So I'll just say I'll kind of frame my response from the position of like me coming into this work. And, after having spent 6 years in the California Youth Authority that you described previously, I was there when there was 11,000 young people that were predominantly Black, brown, and, poor white and Southeast Asian young people that had a lot of unmet needs and tremendous amounts of trauma, kind of being thrown to the wolves and then expected to rehabilitate. And none of that was actually achieved ever. And having to get out of that youth prison system to find help in the community, it also informed what rehabilitation could look like through a community-based approach and getting that support, making my way through Berkeley and ultimately graduating from UCLA School of Law to then become an attorney in 2012, meeting Elizabeth Calvin when she was still championing SB 9 to end LWOP for juveniles. I'll just say I recognized immediately that what she was trying to do was incorporate the voices of impacted people. There weren't any formerly incarcerated attorneys in the movement, and I was proud to be the one. And over time, more have come home, more people have come home. And what I think has been really a big part of our success, and didn't really happen as far as I could tell before that, was buy-in from community in this larger fight around policy, or to say it another way, there was the white policy advocates and legal advocates that were overwhelmingly white. I'm sure, James, you were a part of that community as well. And, but there weren't very many other people. And oftentimes they didn't come down to the ground and work with folks in the hood, whether we're talking East LA, South LA, the Bay, or anywhere else. And that was my orientation. I didn't want to work with white people and the lawyers. I didn't like lawyers, even as a lawyer, right? And I felt much more comfortable in the Inland Empire and the East Bay or anywhere, Stockton, Fresno. And I felt like that was my strength. And over time, I just kind of found a thing that I was good at, that I was passionate about, and that was useful, which is beginning to bridge kind of these two worlds that I was a part of, which was the hood and the establishment, right? The club, the lawyers. And playing my role to help bring these two worlds together. And over time, everybody, I think, kind of came to the table and learned to build with each other, and trust, at least amongst the coalition, is something that is not freely given, that is earned, and it was work. But, as Elizabeth Calvin shared previously, it was really, I would say a big part of it has been coalition building, including the voices of, impacted youth, families, service providers, advocates, policy folks. We all look different, come from different backgrounds, but I think we're all there to share decision-making, to share resources, and cultivating a selfless harmony, right? Like, I think that is really what we tried to get to. And I think that right now, a lot of the wins that we've been able to achieve have become because most of us have decided to put ourselves last and put the young people first and really work towards aspirational change. But it really, at the beginning, required these kind of coming together of two worlds, which was the disadvantaged have-nots and the very privileged haves, to see each other, even with differences, but to see the larger goal. And a lot of the activities have been focused on cultivating champions in the legislature, to bring about legislative wins, to train defenders who oftentimes are overworked and burned out and sometimes don't see the harm of a little bit of probation or short time in detention when it's all harmful, right? Building community partnerships and capacity building, to say it simply, like teaching folks to fish and not just feeding them, right? Building youth leaders, helping them to develop data-driven advocacy, developing their own communications campaigns so if they can shift the narrative of young people, Black and brown and Native youth, away from being dangerous and towards being valuable, right? Also partnerships with philanthropy that, at least in California, have really taken serious this idea of equitable funding folks from the bottom up to be the leaders, to be the change makers, with support from the policy folks, because in tandem, you can do so much more. And then obviously litigation, when all else fails, you gotta bring the hammer to really defend and expand legal protections for young people, But I think a collective strategy that includes all things at the table, but really focusing on centering, not just through appearance with a few tokens, but really building authentic partnerships with impacted communities and letting some of the ego go, as far as, being a lawyer or believing that you know better, it's just not true. They know better, and we should share in the decision making. I think that has been at the heart of our success.
So thank you for that, Frankie. I really appreciate your keeping it real about who the advocates were. Because when I started, it was all policy people, lawyers, academics, policy kind of think folks, and who was not at the table with voices like yours. And that's why we're going to end. That isn't Pollyanna. That is not easy to have those two streams merge in a way that is helpful and productive. And so that is the work. And a lot of success in California has happened because of that. And we have our most recent person, our speaker Jocelyn here, who's just been through that system, is young, is totally invested, because she has Joshua, who doesn't want to see what happened to her or others in her community happen to her son. So that's real skin in the game. And so Jocelyn, why don't you talk about, even though there have been things that have been done for, some of the OGs like myself, you live in a world where there's a lot of hostility towards communities of color and people in your community, and people who the center helps. So why don't you share some of your experience in the youth justice sector and enlighten us with ideas that you want us to hear?
Okay, hi everybody, my name is Jocelyn Aguilar. I'm 18 years old. So today I'm just gonna tell you guys a little bit like my experience in the system. I went to juvenile hall when I was 16. I was there for about a month, and then I began probation. I really don't think it's okay to criminalize these kids, because honestly, that's what I was back then, and for a kid like a 16-year-old or even like a 17-year-old or a 15-year-old, to be hearing like in courtroom the DA's talking down on you instead of like acknowledging like, okay, it's just we need to figure out the root of the problem. Why is this child making these decisions or something like that, right? Instead hearing like, oh, they're a danger to society, or they're monsters, or they're this and that, when it's really not like that. I was fortunate to come across the center from a program in probation, and I'm really grateful for all the opportunity. The center really invested in me. Even as a youth, they never once questioned like, oh, she's just a kid, like she doesn't know, like she shouldn't have a say in like these topics. They did the opposite. I've been given the opportunity to attend meetings with POs, DAs, and judges at the young age that I am, and speak my mind about issues. I was actually part of a organization called Tank Organizers, and it was me and other youth from ages like 13 to 18. And like James had mentioned earlier, we got the SROs removed off campuses, and that was the big win. And we did it all ourselves as a youth. I think that our voice matters. I think that if it's something that's going to affect our community, we're the first ones that should have a say in it, because all these people that aren't in our community, will go home at the end of the day, live their lives, and all the decisions that they made will not affect them. It will not affect their families. It won't affect their kids. For me personally, like James mentioned, I do have a son, and I don't want him to go through what I've seen, like what I experienced and what I've seen others like Black and brown youth experience. I really want to change it, because we are the future. The youth are going to grow up, one day be 20, be 30, be 40. and it all starts somewhere, and then our kids are going to be the ones growing up and having to deal with all those consequences or all the changes, you know. um I am really grateful for my opportunity as a youth, to be an advocate at the age that I am. I'm extremely grateful. I think that um, that we need more youth. That, like, we are the future, like I mentioned. You know. Yeah, that's a little bit about what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn. That was a lot of bit. And it's more than a little bit. And so thank you. I just for you all and for that firsthand account, especially moving, Jocelyn, when you're talking about like what we need as people, as opposed to this monsters. You know what I mean? Is that you dehumanize people in order to treat them in ways that are inhuman. And you're 16. I mean, come on. So I really appreciate your talking about what can we do to restore and heal and talk about how we remedy disinvestments in our communities rather than this whole notion of punishment and retribution. You guys have laid a great floor for how we've come to where we are. But then, Elizabeth, that North Star is still out there amidst the fog in the bay, might not be able to see it. So what is it that you guys feel like, Frankie, you did touch upon some of this in your opening comment, but can you give a little bit of a reaction to the things that, Jocelyn talked about and what you think as you look back as a Frankie Guzman in 2026, 5 years from now, if we're having the same discussion, what do you think of the things that you would say, yeah, we needed to do that, and these are the kind of things we did? So Frankie, do you have any kind of insights on that?
Do you mean like what are the things we need to do now to get us in a better
Yeah. If you were to look back at 2026,
yeah,
that I know we needed to do this and we did it, or I know we needed to do this and we didn't do it.
Well, I think generally speaking, even with all the wins, we talk about California being a leader, and I guess we did all these bad things in the 90s, and then we're trying to dismantle them, and so for that we're giving ourselves credit. But really, I think in context, it makes us like the best of the worst, right? Because
yeah. Okay, there you go.
But we're still in a toxic place, I would say. I think for having all this time in the state to really think about what's wrong with it, it's like we still continue to be overly reliant on the juvenile and criminal legal system to handle young people who have unmet needs. These are racialized youth. These are youth with oftentimes LGBT backgrounds, homeless youth with disabilities, youth that have suffered tremendous amounts of abuse and neglect. And all we have for them is intolerance. When they mess up, go to your room. And by room, I mean your cell, right? And here's this corrections officer who's now going to play the role of social worker, therapist, after school, life coach. And it's just wrong, right? We, in California, most kids, better than 60% of young people on probation, which is the most common response for kids that come into the system is probation. Most of them in California are on probation for misdemeanors and status offenses. We're not putting kids on probation that are the scary kids. I mean, I can only assume that it's because of money. We need to keep kids on the rolls to justify a very bloated government that is making money off of humans, young people. We're over relying on juvenile halls. Like, for example, right now in California, we're giving ourselves credit for making a decision to shut down our youth prison system, but the alternative is a much worse place that is juvenile hall built for short-term confinement. But the probation's plan and the state governor's plan is to keep kids in there for long-term, as much as 11 years, which would be terrible, disastrous, and would harm young people and possibly create more victims. So what we need to do is one, shift our focus away from relying on law enforcement, probation, corrections models to deal with young people that have real human needs, and begin to invest in an infrastructure that builds up and resources community-based alternatives, that makes better use of educators, social workers, other health-based providers to do the work that they're uniquely trained to do. And sure, probation will have a role, but that's, for a far smaller number of kids in a very particular setting. And if you think about these investments that we've tried to make in California, that you mentioned at the outset, the $60 million for pre-arrest diversion programs that Nickel and our partners championed, intended for foster youth, tribal youth, and other vulnerable youth. And alongside that, Los Angeles has tried to develop an OYDD, an Office of Youth Diversion and Development, that has been, I think has gotten some pushback from local, the politicians, the system administrators, the status quo. At the state level, we tried to pass a bill that would have resourced 3 additional counties to do what LA County has done. And that was killed by the unions, the same unions that claim to be social justice unions, because they're interested in money and maintaining their power. It is better to lock up the children to keep the parents employed, I think is their philosophy, right? And then now we have a state system, the OYCR, which is intended to oversee this new realigned system through a health-based framework. And again, the governor, probation's lobby, the county lobbyists, the special interests are fighting that because they don't want accountability over how young people are treated, how state money is used, and ultimately what becomes of the system. So all that I'm saying is we need to continue to fight to make sure that the investments go towards community, towards health, towards proven effective strategies, and right-size probation and the system, and stop deferring to them for all things related to young people with problematic behavior, because that is not what has produced results.
And that is the pivot in where we are in this evolution. Is well-being is how we keep ourselves safe, not all the things that you talked about, Frankie. We're hearing this hue and cry now. We need public safety. We need public safety. And my position is, how do the elites keep their kids safe? The elites don't keep their kids safe by locking them up. They keep their kids safe by giving them opportunities, and investments, and that's what we need. So I am also, in addition to the moderator and enjoying this conversation, I'm also the timekeeper. And so I'm going to ask Elizabeth and Jocelyn to talk about what they see as the future of where we need to go. I want to say to one of the people that sent in a chat, we're going to get to your question, because if I have to, I'm going to cut off either Jocelyn or Elizabeth. One of the two of them is going to get the hook in order for us to get a chance to answer your question about youth offenders. So Elizabeth, I'm going to come to you, and Jocelyn, I'll go to you on what you see as this, what we could be doing future, from somebody that's been around, and from Jocelyn, who is just 18 and living this and seeing this through her life experiences. Elizabeth?
Sure. I couldn't agree more with Frankie. I think that's an incredibly important focus. I also, think that I pray that some of us will be alive long enough to look back and have everybody realize how inhumane and how crazy it is to lock kids up. And how that, to your point, James, that is not what makes community safer. It's not what helps children, grow up and thrive and be the individuals they want to be. What it does is just perpetuate a system that was really grounded in a perspective of white saviors coming in and rescuing Black and brown kids, from families that they deemed, incapable. And I think one thing that we have as a problem, whether it's to reduce the role of probation and the kind of surveillance and interference in people's lives that probation does, or whether it's to reduce the use of locking children in cells, or reduce and end prosecuting children as adults, we really have to go back and deal with the fact that the system is based on this concept. And I think I'm not saying that we have to get everybody to agree and come to understand that. But if we don't recognize that that is what is driving the system to this day, then a lot of these changes that we may make, we're going to continually have to fight back, the rollback of those. And we're
Absolutely.
seeing that now. So I guess my hope is that what's on the horizon is really ending prosecution of children as adults, people under age 18 as adults, period. California has eliminated prosecution of children under age 16, and I hope on the horizon is eliminating it for 16 and 17-year-olds and changing how California treats emerging adults as well. But at the same time, I feel like we need to have the equivalent of truth and reconciliation or whatever that is a real awareness building of the foundation of this system.
Yeah, and I appreciate, Elizabeth, you talking about the rollbacks. I feel that so many people, this is just totally editorial comment, so many people in social justice movements mistake wins for victory.
Yeah, right.
I mean, there are wins, but we haven't, there isn't a victory. We just got to win, and we got to keep piling on those wins, and there will be losses. And the point is that we don't claim victory when it's just a win, because as Frankie has said, and as Jocelyn and Frankie have lived through, it don't feel like a victory to them. Yeah. It's still work to be done. Yeah. And so, Jocelyn, from your perspective, as somebody that penetrated the system at 16, came out okay, surviving a new son in your life, tell us what you think, from your perspective, all your work at the center, that you're trying to get your peers to see as what should be done in the future.
What I think is that a lot of the money that is going to juvenile halls, to the probation officers, the DAs should all be put into the community. Like I mentioned, or like you guys had mentioned, I work at Young Women's Freedom Center, and like I've seen myself grow from the person that first came to the center to the person that I am now. I've seen other youth here grow and take back their power, and we're lucky enough to have come across this center that works on healing us and like healing our trauma and all those things, that when we were in juvenile hall, they never once thought about that. They never once thought like, what is causing this to happen? Like, what trauma from their past? Like, instead they're just thinking like, oh, they're just criminals. That's it. We're done. We're not gonna do anything else. We're not gonna like invest in them, invest in their future, so they could be successful. No, we're just gonna label them as this, and that's what they are. I really think that we're fortunate enough here in Santa Clara County to have Young Women's Freedom Center. We also have one in San Francisco, Oakland, and LA, but there's many other states, there's many other cities, counties that need a center like this, or that need a program like this. So I really do think that we need to invest that money that is going towards probation into the community, into these youth, because we are all capable of reaching success and like be somebody more than just like a kid that's locked up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for that perspective, and what you're talking about is investment. Elizabeth and Frankie have talked about, we decided to invest in the punishment industry, in the safety ecosystem of probation, law enforcement, judges, and prosecutors. And what that has gotten us is absolutely nothing. Nobody feels safer after 300 years than they did before. So I appreciate your saying that investment in places like the Young Women's Freedom Center and other places in communities should be invested in. So we have one question that I'm going to close us up with. I got 4 minutes. I thought we've done pretty well on time. This has been tight, very informative, a lot of information. And one of our colleagues that was tuning in wanted to know about the youth offender program and how that might be able to help reduce sentences or get folks out. And so I'm gonna turn to Elizabeth and Frankie. And between the two of them, they can handle that. Elizabeth, why don't you start us off on that and either take us home or turn it over to Frankie to finish us up.
All right. I mean, the youth offender parole in California is a law that was passed in 3 parts. And now it applies to anyone who was under age 26 at the time of their crime. And the law basically does 2 things. One, it requires that when somebody comes up for their parole hearing, the commissioners must give great weight to the fact that they were very young, and that's incredibly relevant to their behavior at the time. And so commissioners are being trained and being required to really examine the fact that somebody was young at the time of their crime. The second thing it does is make sure that someone who was under age 26, no matter how long their sentence was, we'll set aside life without parole for a minute here, but there are many, many people in California who have sentences of 75, 100, 120 years, that no matter how long their sentence is, they will have an opportunity for parole at either 15, 20, or 25 years. So it moves it earlier. Now, there are some people who are excluded, although there's a lot of action in the courts right now that I think is going to change that. And there are many of us that are working to include people who have life without and are age 18 and above. Those 18 and under who have life without are eligible for this youth offender parole process. Frankie, what would you add, or what did I miss?
Yeah, and I'll just say one other way I think that it helps reduce sentences is obviously the mechanics of it. Elizabeth just described, but before youth offender parole laws came into to effect, I could just say I observed violence in the prisons was just through the roofs, and a lot of it, most of it, I think had to do with a loss of hope. And I think what I've often said, nothing makes a person more dangerous than complete loss of hope, right? And hope is not a frivolous thing. It is it is truly important. And even with seeing some people being going home through this statute has encouraged other people to do better. Either A, because they are also newly eligible and want something similar, or B, even if they're not currently eligible, holding out hope that one day the law may change and will allow them to also benefit the way that they've seen their peers. And this kind of just goes back to our earlier point is punishment doesn't change behavior positively. All it does is dehumanize, destroy, and make us less safe. But infusing, these opportunities for release creates more hope, and that is what makes us safer. So really what I'm saying is addressing the human in everybody, addressing these human needs through hope, love, I would just say respect for the person. Even if the person committed a crime, the things that we do and how we treat them will make us more or less safe. And so we need to continue to think about that, because even if some of these people aren't going home, many people going into prison in these violent environments will go back home, and they're going to affect us. So you think you're isolating one person, but the one person you put in prison will affect all the other hundreds of thousands of people that they will interact with. And so we need to do what we can to create more opportunities for improvement and hope for a better day outside those walls wherever we can, because that's what makes us safe. Thank you, James.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Especially in the land where you can get a gun as easily as you can get a pack of cigarettes. Mm-hmm. We definitely need that hope. I want to thank everybody, and I'm going to turn it back to Patty to close us out.
Thank you, James, and thank you to our panel. This has been Proven Solutions, Community Investments that Transform Youth Justice, presented by the National Center for Youth Law, which is proud to celebrate 50 years of impact in 2021. Please stay tuned for information about our next live event in late August, titled Still Separate and Unequal, the Resegregation of America's Public School System. This concludes our event. Thank you for participating.
Great job, James.
All right, party people.
All right.
Have a good rest of the week.
Okay, you have some good time off. enjoy
Yeah.
the,
No, I'm not. This is work, man.
oh, this is work.
Yeah, it's 94 degrees and it's work.